There is rarely a life untouched by hardship or challenge. On this podcast, we invite our guests to share their very personal stories. We harness the wisdom and resilience of our guests, which has shaped who they are today.
Carl Rogers said, "That which is most personal is in fact most universal." Together we'll be inspired to embrace the resilience in our own stories and to gain strength in the face of adversity and have a few laughs along the way.
Hi, I'm Donna.
And I'm Di. We are the Double Ds and welcome to the Discovery Diaries.
We acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which we are recording this podcast. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge their spiritual connection to family and storytelling.
Both Donna and Di were born here on these lands. We are grateful to draw on the culture of telling and sharing stories, and we hope that you will draw inspiration from the stories that are shared here. So, Donna, I was thinking it might be nice for you to hear that, we've had a bit of a ride so far with the podcast, and just to maybe tell you a little bit about what that journey's been like for us so far, because let's face it, we're complete novices, and here we find ourselves a few months in with over 1,000 downloads. But we thought you might like just to know what it's been like for us on our journey so far.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good lesson for me in things don't have to be perfect. You can learn a little bit and give it a go and see what happens and improve over time. And I've thoroughly enjoyed the adventure of becoming a podcaster, that's for sure.
Yeah, and you might not know that we kind of started this just from a conversation. I remember going for a walk with you and we decided to we were just sharing, and you shared your dream from the night before.
Yes, that's right. And I had never in a million years thought of becoming a podcaster, although I do really love listening to podcasts. And so then when I told you about this dream I had about starting a podcast, then you said...
Well, I jumped straight in and went, I kind of think I've always wanted to start one, and maybe we should just give it a go. And I remember kind of this feeling of, if I overthink this, I probably won't do it. But I also remember being really clear that if I was going to embark on something like this, I didn't want to do it alone. I had that real sense that collaborating and being with someone on a journey like this was really important to me. That felt like a non-negotiable. So when you then said it, it was like, well, this is something I've always wanted to do, and now here's somebody who might want to do the journey with me.
I totally agree, Di. I have really, really loved doing the podcast and meeting all the guests, but that has been my favourite part, is doing it with you. I don't think I would enjoy it as much if it was just on my own. So thank you for becoming one of the Double Ds with me.
Oh, well, likewise. And I think maybe you might also like to know that, what I really appreciate about Donna specifically as a kind of co-partner on this journey is she is so tenacious. She is so determined. Donna, you're brilliant at just researching things and then finding out how we can action those really quickly. And I really appreciate that structure that you bring.
Well, I think we've been a really great team because you're very good at asking the right questions for our guests as well. So I think we've been a good team. The other thing I find that I've really loved is just hearing the stories from our guests, and we've had such diverse people on the podcast so far, which is one of our goals, I guess, is to get so many different people's stories. But just almost everyone has been through challenging times in their lives, and how they've negotiated it has been I've found one of my favourite parts is just really spending enough time to really listen to these people's stories.
Yeah, and I remember those early thoughts kind of thinking, everyone's got a story. Everyone's got a story. The more people I meet, the more you just actually listen to people that you meet. No one is immune from hardship. No one's immune from actually a story in there, just what they would say is just ordinary life actually turns out to be, I don't know, something that's worth sharing, I think.
Exactly. And I think particularly older people, because they've been around for so much longer. I put us in there as well.
Cool,
but
right.
especially like some
Join
of the
the old
people
club.
that, you know, for example, Steve Cox, our first episode, 69 years old, Noongar mother, Caucasian father, and just the amount of things that had happened to him in his life, some of the systemic racism, but just so many things that had happened and so many stories. And his episode has really resonated with a lot of people. And I think this is where I like that Carl Rogers saying that you came up with, Di, about.
So Carl Rogers had this lovely saying that said that which is most personal is in fact universal. So those things that we think are, oh, it's just me or it's just my experience, often tend to be the things that everybody experiences. So it's got a universal principle about it.
Yes.
And I think that's why the sharing the stories things feels so important, because it's like it helps us to know we're not alone.
Absolutely. And Sarah, which was episode 4, who tragically lost her newborn baby, that was a really good example of that, because she has had an outpouring of support and messages from people who have gone through a similar thing, either miscarriage, something with a birth. And I think some of these stories are a lot more common than what you would think, but people don't talk about it. So with Sarah sharing her story in such an authentic, and it was such a difficult story for her to tell, that really touched people and made them reach out to her and share their own stories.
Yeah, and the other thing that people are telling us is that they've never told their story like that before publicly. And so it's actually giving them a bit of a platform or just a way to actually tell their story for the first time in the way that they want to tell it. Because one of the things we always say to our guests is, what is it that you want to tell us? You know, like, we don't prescribe that. We don't have a big agenda about that. We're like, what is it you want to share? And people have said, you know, no one's really often asked me that. What's the bits that are important to me? So we're really kind of careful about and deliberate about that, aren't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. And just going back to, for example, Steve Cox again, many people around the world and in Australia as well probably haven't heard in as much detail as Steve told a story of a person with the background that Steve has, his stories. And a lot of his stories are stories that a lot of people, Aboriginal people, have gone through, and Indigenous people have gone through systemic racism and a lot of hardships. So almost in him giving his individual story is a universal story for people to understand more about the history. The history, and a lot of it's untold history, because in the past people, you know, we haven't heard as much from Aboriginal and Indigenous stories. That's changing now. But I think that's also why his episode has been, you know, probably our most popular episode to date.
And then we've got others who've come on and had shared history with South Africa, for example. So when I and Mac or Ian came on, actually I had people come up and really relate to the South African racism part. So their experience, even though they weren't Black South African, they really connected with those times of apartheid in that era in South Africa. So I think one of the beauties for us is in running this is that we then hear that impact that it has on somebody else about that shared history. And it might just be a little snippet of the podcast, one little bit of it, and we couldn't possibly imagine what that would be.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm really pleased that we've had such diverse guests to date, with different backgrounds, with different stories that they've gone through. So Rebecca had corporate burnout and she experienced domestic violence. And we've really tried to have different types of guests and different stories. And
it's maybe worth sharing with you as well that one of our most recent guests in this juncture was Wayne Sankey around the tsunami. And we've actually had the brother of one of the people who lost his lives in that terrible event. We've actually been able to connect with him because of the episode, and for us, part of the joy as well is connecting these stories to the right people as well. So here we are nearly 20 years later, and the brother of someone who lost their life and who is keeping his legacy alive has been reminded of the value of his brother's life by hearing that Wayne's story for the first time.
And that's another example of, I've heard novelists and writers say this, that they put everything into their writing, but once it gets released, it's out in the world and they don't know the impact it's going to have, and you never can know the little ripple or the little impact that it may have, which will cause another impact. And that's been something I've really gained a lot from, and just it's almost out of our hands. Once it's out there, we get a lot out of it doing it, but also you who are listening, then it's over to you.
Yeah, exactly. I was having that conversation with somebody, another potential guest, because that's part of also what this process is about for Donna and I, is maybe we've met somebody or we've started to realise that there might be a story somewhere. The way that we go about this is we go and meet them. We say, can we have a coffee? We give them some time to maybe think about, well, do they feel like they want to share their story? And if they do, what parts of that? And so there's a whole process that goes on behind the podcast, isn't there, that we really try and help our guests to feel comfortable before they arrive, help them to feel safe in sharing the parts of their story that they want. And I was sharing, part of the reason that we were doing this with this potential guest that will hopefully come on our podcast soon, and just sharing that, we don't really mind where these stories go, and we hold it really lightly, the impact that might potentially have. We're just here to kind of almost catalyse those stories. But, yeah, we're seeing benefits for the person who's telling them. We're seeing the benefit for the people who are listening to them, like you. And obviously Donna and I, just feel really privileged to walk alongside people in their storytelling too.
That's right. I went down to visit an old ex-colleague of mine who's retired, and as soon as I sat down with him, he said, right, I wrote down a list of all the leadership lessons from listening to Dr. David Russell Weiss, who was the Director General of the Health Department for 9 years. So he got a lot out of that from a leadership perspective. So it's impacting, different episodes are impacting different people.
Yeah, I've actually got somebody who's written on their fridge 2 of the words that Iron Mac said, that Ian said, and so contemplation and what was the 2 that he said? Oh, I have to remember them now. But
I'll have to ask Iron Mac about it.
But he's written them on his fridge.
Oh, that's good. So also, Di, a couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks ago now, I went into the other side of it, which was I did my first ever podcast as a guest, and that will be coming out in coming months. It definitely gave me a good insight because some of our guests come on and they're very, very nervous. And now I know why, not only because of being in the microphone for the first time, but also, it's very vulnerable sharing a traumatic story. So that will be the first time that I've shared the first part of my story. So that will be coming out. There'll be a bit of editing needed, so there's a few tears. But, yeah, so I really appreciated being given the opportunity to go on someone else's podcast, and it's good to put yourself in the other side of the other shoes of being the guest.
Yeah.
It certainly learned a lot from that as well.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear, and we look forward to that coming out as well, Donna, and when you're ready to tell us when that's due, we'll look forward to hearing a bit of your story too. I have been on a podcast, I think a couple actually, when I was living back in the UK. They're probably buried in the bowels of the annals of podcasts somewhere, but again, just I think a lot of that is about something happens for us when we share a bit of ourselves as well. Something gets released, something gets passed on that is very healing as well for us.
That's right. And we have had quite a few people come on the show and say afterwards that felt really good to tell my story. That felt like it was healing, helping me to heal as well. So we are on Instagram at Double Ds Discovery Diaries. So send us a message if you have a favourite episode or a favourite moment of an episode and how it's impacted you, and let us know, because we love hearing stories and hearing about the impact that various episodes have had on you.
And we'd also love to hear from you. Drop us a message if you have someone that you think has a story that, might be worth sharing. And as I said, we always meet with them and check out whether they want to share their story. But we really want to keep this diversity going. We really want to have different generations, different perspectives. So it's not just about different stories, but it's really covering that diversity in all the ways that diverse means. So if you know someone that you think might like to be one of our guests, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Di.
Thanks, Donna.
This episode is brought to you by my coaching program about navigating a life quake. If you've experienced a life quake, which is a traumatic life event that you are struggling to cope with, then this 9-week coaching program is for you. This is based on a very traumatic workplace-related incident that I had in November 2021, where I was absolutely struggling to cope. Over the months that followed, I documented everything I did to recover, and I've incorporated it into a framework, which is the Stronger Framework. So the program is Navigating a Life Quake, and it's amongst a supportive community, a transformational 9-week coaching program, which includes weekly virtual coaching sessions and lots of other materials. So if you are interested and you can relate to this, for listeners of the Double Ds podcast, there's a 20% discount. Go to my personal website, www.donnasbalconyviews.com.au. You can find out more information about this transformational coaching program. And if you put in Double Ds, so Double DS as one word, you can get a 20% discount on the 9-week coaching program.
Thanks so much for listening today. We really appreciate you, our listeners. Please like and follow us and share in whatever medium you're on. That really supports us. But we also would love to hear from you if you have a guest that you think would love to share their story. We'd love to do that so that we can get even more stories of courage and resilience out into the world.